Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 45 of my 2022 reads. This week I picked up some books that I own, which made me happy, as well as some romances, although I did DNF one of them. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. So first, I buddy read Guarding Temptation by Talia Hibbert with Freddie at Sluggish Reader, who I will link below. I love buddy reading with Freddie so much, and since it's November, we decided to go ahead and buddy read Guarding Temptation. This is a book that we both own, and I have been meaning to get to this. So this is a romance novella that is friends to lovers, and it's, I think, really well done for the length that it is to make that kind of choice to do friends to lovers. I think with novellas, it's hard to develop a full relationship in such short pages, but when you have a premise where the characters already are really close to each other, that kind of makes it easier. So I really liked the way that this kind of scoped the story, where we have two people who have been friends for years and years. One of them is the hero is the friend of the heroine's older brother. And so it's kind of something that has developed over the years where he's been very protective of her and very caring in an older brother-esque way. And now they're trying to transition that relationship, and it's a little bit hard for them. They're very attracted to each other, and they end up sort of having sex and then realizing like, oh, this is really complicated, especially because they each have their own vulnerabilities. So the heroine is super worried that the hero doesn't see her as, an adult and somebody who he wants to have a relationship with. And he's worried that because she's somebody who's very sex positive and often has sex with men but doesn't like to form relationships because she's super independent, that he doesn't want to lose the friendship with her if he starts having sex with her, because then, she tends not to like to mix the two. And he's like, no, it's really important to me to have this relationship. And so the novella is them trying to figure out how to have this conversation where it's really funny because there's all of these things where maybe I should just, be brave and have this conversation, even though it's difficult and even though I'm really worried about ruining the friendship that we already have, because I want this other person so much and I care about them so much. So I really liked that was the crux of the story. There's also a lot of very interesting sort of political and social commentary in this. So this book is really forced proximity because the heroine has a blog where she writes a lot of political activist stuff. She is a Black woman and she is targeted by some right-wingers because of an article that she wrote about Brexit and kind of talking about what's going on there. And so she ends up moving in with this friend of hers just because she needs a safe place to stay. And so there's a lot in this about the way that she's doxxed and stalked, and about the way that Black women in particular are viewed, and the way that she has to present herself in order to even get attention from the police so that she can file her case, and all these sorts of really interesting things. So lots of very cool topics that are discussed in this very short novella. So I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and it was so fun to discuss this with Freddie as well. Just kind of like how this novella balanced those different aspects. So definitely recommend this. Next, I read The Stand-Up Groomsman by Jackie Lau, which is a pretty much brand new release. It just came out last month. This is the sequel to Don't Fall in Love, and it follows the friends of the main couple from the first book, who had a very rocky first meeting, but they end up thrown together with each other in the course of supporting their friends who are getting married. So all of the sort of pre-wedding and wedding events and that sort of stuff. So the heroine in this is somebody who is very emotionally closed off. She really doesn't have the greatest parents, and she had to do a lot of emotional labor in her family when she was growing up. And as an adult, she said, no, my life is for me, and I don't want to be just there to be useful to other people. And the hero in this is a stand-up comic, and he is somebody who's also had some issues with like his dad and things like that, and has found it hard to pursue his dream of his life. They're both bisexual, by the way, but this was something that was a little bit difficult for the hero to deal with his dad, who was very judgmental about it. And when they meet, he finds himself kind of going too far in judging her for being like in finance rather than pursuing art, when she is clearly like a great artist because she's done fan art for a series that he was in, and he's like, why are you doing this with your life? And she felt real judged. So that's a very hard place to start their relationship from, and that kind of started in the previous book, but of course we see that happen in real time in this book as well. And so they kind of have to overcome that very tough first meeting, as well as just the difficulties of their differing personalities. It's very much an opposites attract. He is somebody who is very goofy. He likes to be the center of attention, and he's very, very emotional, these sorts of things. And she's just really, really closed off, kind of very reluctant to connect with people or to show her emotions or even to have the emotions in the first place. So it's a very slow start to this book. They don't even really start to be together until halfway through the book. Most of it is them even just building a friendship before they can be together. And then once they're together, it's them working through their own issues. I really liked a lot of the mental health representation in this. The hero is somebody who is in therapy. He, takes a depression or anxiety medication, and he has a lot of issues with things like insomnia and just rumination, and like it talks about a lot of that. So I think that one of the things that this book does really well is just dealing with each of them working through their own emotions and mental health issues, as well as their family issues. There's a lot in this about the heroine kind of dealing with the relationship with her family and like kind of setting some good boundaries. So those parts I really liked, but the tone of this was a little bit heavier than I was in the mood for. I think that Donut Fall in Love had some heavier themes, but was also lightened by a lot of the cutesy baking stuff. This one just felt a bit heavier to me. There is a lot of stand-up in this, a lot of the stand-up that the hero does, but those kind of also touch on really, really heavy topics. So for me, it was a little bit heavier. And I think that sometimes like the dynamic between them, it just didn't always work for me, especially because they got off to such a rocky start. But even so, I just really enjoyed Jackie Lau's writing, and I enjoyed the journey that each of these characters was on. So I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next, I finished Glass and Gardens, Solarpunk Summers, edited by Sarena Ulibarri. This is a short story collection that I heard about from Joe at Final Blow Joe, who I will link below. Joe is somebody who really loves optimistic sci-fi, and this is Solarpunk, which is a type of sci-fi that kind of takes a look at our future, understanding the sort of way that we're treating the environment now, but imagining a world where we have developed technologically, but also socially and ecologically, such that we have a future that integrates protecting the environment and growing things with all of the tech. So it's a very kind of hopeful type of dystopian future, if that makes any sense. So I totally see why Joe loved this collection, because it really does have a lot of that hopeful dystopian feel of like, but how could we start protecting the environment more and encourage growth and also create communities and all these sorts of things. So there's some really interesting world building in this that I liked. I think that's the strongest part of these stories. The stories themselves, though, kind of varied. Like, there were some really good ones, especially towards the beginning, but I found myself getting a little frustrated and DNFing quite a few stories in this. Just either the writing wasn't quite up to par for me, or the tone was a little too silly, or these sorts of things. And even the stories that I definitely enjoyed, sometimes with the hopeful type of SFF, it can get a little saccharine. So I think that if you're interested in more hopeful dystopian futures, like how could we rebuild? It's that sort of almost post-dystopian, we've messed things up, but how could we move on? So if you're looking for a little bit of that, I think that this is definitely a good collection to pick up, even though not every story in this worked for me. But again, I think the world building was really cool, even if it was more of a hit and miss collection for me overall. So I gave this collection 3 out of 5 stars. Then I read a picture book, I Am Okay to Feel by Karamo Brown and Jason Rachel Brown, illustrated by Diobelle Cerna. So this is a really lovely picture book that is all about a dad and a son having a conversation about emotions. And it is beautifully illustrated. I absolutely loved the images in this, and I loved the way that weather and physical kind of feelings are used to relate to how we feel inside and how we handle those emotions. And this book is just really, it's like a therapy picture book where it's all about how do we talk about emotions, and when we feel difficult emotions, what do we do with that? And it's just like really, really beautiful, really well done. Loved it. Definitely a 5 out of 5 star for me. And then I did DNF one book, which was Bet on It by Jodie Slaughter. So this book had a really cute premise, basically about a guy who goes back to the small town where his grandmother lives because she's having some health problems, and ends up going with her to bingo, and there meets her younger friend who is her bingo partner, and they end up, the hero and heroine end up having a bingo-based sex pact, which just sounds really fun. But I think that this book is maybe not quite as, I don't know, lighthearted as that premise sounds. And I think maybe Kazen had mentioned that this has some heavier themes in it as well. So I got about 15% through this book before I realized that the tone of the book just wasn't quite working for me. So this book is actually really focusing a lot on both of the main characters dealing with a lot of anxiety. And so there's like on-page panic attacks. Both of them have had a history of this, dealing with a lot of social anxiety and just, you know, really like very intrusive into their daily lives. It's hard to function at times. And so there's that kind of heavier theme. That was maybe not quite a good match for where my mood is at this moment. Also, I found that the descriptions in this were just not working for me, and I can get really picky about things with descriptions. Like if I feel that they're too graphic, and graphic doesn't have to mean violent for me, it just means like too visceral almost. It's too much and it grosses me out. And that was happening in this. This usually doesn't happen to me in romance novels. It's a lot more frequent in things like literary fiction, or definitely anything that has violence or anything like that. But here I found that there were some scenes being described where I just kind of got grossed out, and some of them were scenes that I think were supposed to be like chemistry and attraction, and I just was not into it. There was one where they went to a restaurant and it was describing him finding her eating a burger really sexy, and I just found that description very off-putting. And I realized, like, okay, this is maybe not quite the book for me. I got just 15% in, so it's not like I really got into the meat of the story. And I think this could totally work for other people, but it just wasn't quite for me. Okay, so that is everything that I read this week and DNF'd. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, if you want to tell me what you've been reading, I'd love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.